movement should oppose affirmative action for women in Western liberal democracies. So first of all, let's see what we're talking about in this motion. So the feminist movement is an ideology that promotes the idea that women should be equal to men in all respects and that fight for the rights for women. And we see that this ideology has taken the form of a group that actively supports this ideology. So, affirmative action, now going on, is a form of positive discrimination, which means that because we acknowledge that a certain group has less chances to occupy a position, we give them the position, to a representative of that group on the criteria that they are initially discriminated. For example, if two persons, a man and a woman, are going for the post of a doctor in a hospital, we would say by using affirmative action that the woman should get the post even if the man and the woman are equally from an academic perspective. Now, Western liberal democracies, we see that these are democratic nations belonging to the West, such as the United States of America, the United Kingdom, Germany, and even, ladies and gentlemen, our colonies, Canada. So, what makes the difference today about these? What are they? Why are we talking about these Western liberal democracies? In our point of view today, what makes them different is that they no longer perpetuate the gender stereotypes we see in the rest of the world. They no longer discriminate women in these places. So, in this context, we believe that we should support the motion today, and we should oppose affirmative action used by the feminist movement. Now, we bring today before you three main arguments. First of all, I'm going to talk about the inconsistency with the feminist ideology. Second of all, I'm going to talk about the context in which we place this debate in the Western liberal democracies and why are they so special. And my colleague Rezny will talk about the consequences and what exactly this means about other types of discrimination. So first of all, upon inconsistency with the feminist ideology. We see that the feminist ideology is based on the fact that women are just as capable as men in achieving anything. That they are just as capable, just as intelligent, and just as perseverant as men in obtaining a position or a career. And ladies and gentlemen, if the feminist movement would support affirmative action, they would be inconsistent with this idea. Why is that? Because they would send a message that actually females and women cannot and are not able to obtain that post in ordinary circumstances. We see that as especially damaging to the feminist movement, because for centuries they have supported women are just as intelligent, smart, capable as men. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if they would support affirmative action, they would say the contrary. They would send a message to the society that actually no, women aren't quite that smart. They aren't quite that intelligent so that they can be a doctor. So we need to help them a bit because they can't go over a man in this area. And we believe that is especially damaging to the feminist movement.
Certainly.
Why? No, thank you, sir. Why? Because it loses credibility. It loses credibility in the purposes it has instituted from the beginning. It loses credibility that it supports the fact that women are just as capable, smart, and so on as men, due to the fact that they say that a woman cannot, in ordinary circumstances, obtain that position, so let's help them. That clearly states that that woman does not actually have the characteristics needed for that position, so we need to help her. Well, no. On this side of the house today, we support the fact that women should be the ones who prove their capacity, the ones who actually prove that they are as smart, as capable, and as intelligent as men, and that they do not need a help and an artificial input in this, no thank you sir, in this respect, because it would undermine their positions as equals to men. Now, I'm going to go on into my second argument today, about the nature and the context in which we face this debate. And we see that in the motion today before the House is the fact that we're talking about Western liberal democracies. And I want to tell you today that Western liberal democracies are different from unconsolidated democracies or any kind of governance in the way because in the last 4 decades, since Margaret Thatcher and Marie Curie, we have seen in the world of Western liberal democracies a huge development in female implication and flourishment, ladies and gentlemen, in domains such as science, politics, and any kind of management and so on. We have seen that in the world in which we live, in Western liberal democracies, females have proved that they are just as capable as men, have occupied position in science, in politics, in management, and so on. We see that, for example, in the USA and the United Kingdom, 60% of students in high-level universities are females. They have proved that they can enter, and they have been developing since then, taking a moment, since then, and have flourished in domains such as science, politics, and management. Yes.
Okay, so first of all, that's an inconsistency within your case. You're saying that on one hand, we think that, women, already have this kind of thing, but like on the other hand, we think that that's not so.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, sir. So, my first argument today was about the fact that actually, yes, women are as capable and so on, and that is the fact that the feminist movement supports, and that if the feminist movement would not oppose affirmative action, it would prove to be inconsistent with its action till then. We see no contradiction. I've said that the feminist movement and that actually women are just as equal, capable, and so on as men, and that the feminist movement should not deny that by using affirmative action. Now, going on to my own case about the nature of Western liberal democracies, we see that, as I've said, women have achieved equality in all domains, and the most important thing here is they have achieved equality in these domains through their own forces, ladies and gentlemen. They have achieved equality through their own capability, intelligence, and so on. And by the feminist movement support of affirmative action, it is sending the message that actually that's not true. That actually women still need an artificial input to put them in the position of a doctor, to put them into the position of a world leader. Well, no, ladies and gentlemen, and today we stand for equality of women, and we say that today that has already been obtained in Western liberal democracies. Now, even if we would accept that sometimes, even in Western liberal democracies, on rare occasions, there are some discriminative things going on, and in rare occasions this happens. I think Western liberal democracies have already perfected a system that deals with them. If a woman in the United States, in the rare occasion, if she's discriminated at entry in a job, she will sue that company, ladies and gentlemen. And history has proved us that she will win due to the fact it's exactly because the trend in our society is that we do not accept discrimination already. We have in the United States, in the UK, in Germany, and so on, policies such as the sexual harassment policy that clearly states in the law that women cannot be discriminated against, and that women sue due to this reason. So we see that we have the systems to control negative discrimination, and that we do not need positive discrimination. For all these reasons, I beg.
Thank you very much. Now we welcome the first speaker of the opposition to open their case.
Ladies and gentlemen, women can vote. They aren't denied education, and a lot has achieved so far. And I'm a woman, except I see the time for change has not ended yet. We still have inequalities due to society's construct, and women are still paid less than men. Women can be seen as objects, and we don't have enough women in the place. And that's why on side opposition, we're very proud to oppose this motion. Okay, so before I go on with my constructive material, I would like to go on doing some rebuttal. Okay, so first of all, on side opposition, they haven't really defined this house. So they need to clarify what this house is. Okay, and they talked about 2 points. First, they talked about the inconsistency of feminist movement, and second, they talked about Western liberal democracies. So first, let's rebut this point of inconsistency of feminist movement, and they talked about how women are just as capable as men. Well, we see that in unbiased circumstances, women and men are just as equal. But in the reality, we see that there's still discrimination happening for women. They're still paid less, and they're still discriminated against. Okay, second, we talked about the Western liberal democracies. They said that these democracies are different than any kind of government. They talked about how there's huge development in feminist movement, and they said that women are just as capable. But empirically, what we see here is that women still don't occupy as many jobs as men, and we still need more women in those jobs and in the society, and to occupy more jobs and to take more part in the society. And I'll be talking about that more in my speech. Okay, so let's move on to my constructive material. So first, I'm going to be talking about why do we need change, and second, I'm going to be talking about how it delays change. Okay, first let's talk about why we need change. Okay, so legally, we've seen change that allows women to do things. For example, voting, right? However, the problem is the women don't have enough resources, will, and they're objectified. Okay, so let's go on with my first subject, which is will. No, thank you. So there's still an imbalance of power due to social construct, and people still live with traditional religious values, where women are brought up not to pursue education and what they want to be.
Sir.
They're dependent on their husbands and to produce kids for that husband and to do housework. And women are still paid less than men in the same job and the same work. And there's less women in those jobs, right? Particularly jobs of high authority. For example, in the US, 79% of judges are men. And women hold less positions. In America and Canada never had like a woman president or prime minister before. No, thank you. Okay, so let's go on to my second subpoint, which is resources. So this social construct results in unfair and self-perpetuating cycles. And employers and voters see that empirically women are less successful, which means that they often have a bias against women, right? And this results in not voting for them or hiring them, which results in a self-perpetuating cycle. Also, since hiring is much harder for women often end up in homes looking after the kids and so on. And we think this is very unfair to those women. Okay, let's go on to the third subpoint about perception of society. Okay, newer generations often grow up to be similar like their parents because that's what it's normal for them and that's how they perceive society, right? So if, for example, in Korea, parents are often strict in new generations because that's what they've been like for hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And for example, Canada, they're largely multicultural and people from all different countries and cultures are grouped together, so we've always had that culture. So if children see the mothers always staying home, they will perceive society that way, and that's why if we leave this to the natural process continue, this will be the way society perceives. To break this, and to break the cycle, we need to impose change. The feminist movement on its own doesn't have enough seats to create change from politicians, right? Or enough influence to change society's cultural perception of the woman. And before I go on, contribute.
We are not saying that inequality is good. We are just saying that feminist movement should oppose it.
Well, on our side of the house, we think that women still need a lot of support. In society, as I told you before, there's still a lot of jobs that are men, and like people still perceive like women, and they still discriminate against, and this is still happening in reality. So we think that feminist movements still go on. Okay, so let's go on to our second point about how it delays change. So let's look at what happens when society sees feminist movement backing down. People will think that feminist movement was achieved And this makes people believe that their current society must be ideal for gender equality. However, we still think that change actually needs to be happening. They misconceive what actually needs to be done, and let's ask, why is it that if society thinks our goal is achieved? This is because they no longer feel change is necessary. In our society, we still need change. So thank you. So let's look at the first subpoint, which is the woman. So women will feel as if what a woman currently do in society and the way woman is treated is justified. And this results in a woman becoming stay-at-home moms and not trying to necessarily improve their situation. No, thank you. Okay, so we think that the women are actually like feeling discriminated against society, and they feel like they don't really like need to be stay-at-home moms, and like they're not really necessary to improve their situation. But we see that these women actually need their situations to be improved, and they need to be more recognized in the society. Okay, so let's look at men and what they perceive when asked, like what they will react to the situation. So men will also have the same effect happen to them, and men will feel as the way they're treating women is accepted and actually accepted by women, and women are fine with it. But the thing is, women are actually not fine with what the society and the men are treating them. This men, so if we concede to this, the men will also feel that the way they're treating women is accepted, and they'll think it's fine. And they'll also see being fine with the denials of jobs and treating them in a negative way. And I think this is very unfair for the women. And they will continue to do so if society and if these feminist movements back down and if they're not actually achieve anything, right? So the men will think actually like negative of the situation, and they'll see women and they'll keep discriminating women and stuff like that. Okay, so what have we talked about so far in my opposition? So first, we talked about why we need change, and I talked about the will, and second, resources, and I talked about the perception of society. And second, I talked about how the latest change. And first, I talked about the perception of women, and second, I talked about the perception of men, and that's why on-site opposition we're very proud to post this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, let's invite the second speaker of the proposition to continue their case.
Affirmative action is a form of discrimination. The feminist movement should oppose any type of discrimination because within itself, the feminist movement is an anti-form of discrimination. In today's debate, we are supporting the fact that the feminist movement should oppose the affirmative discrimination because it's contrary to what the feminist movement stands for, which is equal chances for women by the women. In today's debate, I will have an argument about the feminist movement's views on discrimination of men and how actually affirmative action is a form of discrimination against other social groups and why the feminists are against this type of discrimination. But before that, I have 4 points of rebuttal. First point of rebuttal, about inequality. We have explained how feminists support the idea that they do not want the opinion of men. They do not want men to tell them, well, we agree that you are inferior, so we just might give you this for free. Feminists believe that they want to achieve equality by themselves, through their own means. And we have heard that, well, in reality, there is still discrimination and women are not treated as good as men. And they have given us the example of housewives. We see nothing wrong with being a housewife. We believe that that's exactly what the feminist movement does. The feminist movement says we are supporting free choice. We believe that if women want to be housewives, they are free to be housewives. Feminist movements are based on the idea that women in today's society are victims of pressures and their lifestyles. If they choose to become housewives, then the feminist movement should support it. Second point with regard. About this whole context, we have received no response to the fact that we are placing this debate in the context of Western liberal democracies, in which we are not talking about discrimination of women in the sense that they do not have equal rights and equal opportunities to get jobs. The biggest democracy in Europe, Germany, has a woman as a chancellor, Angela Merkel. Dilma Rousseff is the president of Brazil. Hillary Clinton is one of the most powerful women in the United States. We have seen this throughout the whole time. Western liberal democracy have made huge progress in terms of how we perceive women. We believe that from this point of view, the feminist movement has the chances of achieving these jobs through their own means, because they have the advantage of living in a world in which the society has accepted them as such. Third point of regard. They have said, well, if they oppose this movement, it would be a downfall. We would see the feminist movement as a movement that has been defeated. Quite the contrary. It would mean that the feminist movement says, we do not want you to help us. We will achieve what we want to achieve through our own means. It means another victory for the feminist movement. It means having the guts to stand up for themselves and to say, we refuse help as long as we know that we would be willing to achieve the same goal without your help, without having men willingly give up their posts in order to benefit women. Fourth point of regard. They have given us analysis on how men think women are okay with being treated badly. False. Men do not think that women are okay with being treated badly. That's the whole purpose of the feminist movement. The feminist movement says we are not okay with being treated badly, but we do not believe that we will be treated less badly if people willingly give up things for us. We believe that the only way that for women to be treated equal as men is to prove that they will achieve such goals by themselves. If we give up the posts for free just because they are women, we would send a message that otherwise they wouldn't be able to occupy those posts. We would send a message, no thank you, that we understand that you have less chances, so therefore we need you to help. We need to help you because you by yourself wouldn't be able to achieve such results. Now moving on to my next chart, which is about the feminist view on men discrimination. I have two premises here. Premise number one. Affirmative action discriminates against men. Because what is affirmative action at the end of the day? It's saying we have a free job. We have a man and a woman, both equally capable. But we are giving it to a woman just because she's a woman. And just because we believe that she would have less chances than the man. Which would mean that you as a man would have to sacrifice your chances of occupying the post because society says we need to help women. And then we believe that actually men are the ones discriminating. We are not achieving equality here. We are just shifting the discrimination from women to men. We believe that in this case, men don't have equal chances of occupying the post just because we believe that women should be motivated for our help. Yes, sir.
Currently, we see the scales are that women have, less of these occupations than men, and if we shift those scales back up, we're not actually making inequalities, we're just equalizing the field.
Okay, that's what I have explained. Women do not want for men to be lowered so that it's easier for them to reach that standard. Women want men to stay as high so that they can prove that they can be as high as men. They do not believe that men should be lowered just because it would be easier for them to reach their standard. Second premise. We believe that the feminist movement should oppose anything that discriminates against social groups for their sake. Because the feminist movement, like I have explained as a response to that POI, was the fact that women, if we discriminate men and say men have to be placed lower so it would be easier for women to achieve the same status, it would mean that women are not capable of rising high enough. It would mean that we need to take action in order to discriminate men, because it would be actually the only way that women will achieve that post. We believe that the higher the standard is, the most correct way of achieving this equality is by keeping the standard high. So when women actually achieve that post, when women actually occupy the post based on their merits, the victory would be bigger for them. It would mean that they have achieved a high status because they have done so themselves, and not by the help of positive discrimination. I would be willing to take it here right now. Thank you. So at the end of the day, I told you 3 things. 1, we believe that it would be contrary to The feminist movement would contradict itself, no thank you now, because it would mean that it would lose credibility in the context in which it would support something that's against their views. Second of all, I told you that the context is not necessary for us to adopt such a measure. The context gives women the privilege of achieving those posts by themselves, of reaching that standard by themselves. And third of all, I told you that it would discriminate against men. We would not solve anything in today's society if we would accept that it is okay to discriminate against a social group that is currently not seen as discriminated just because we want to help another social group. So at the end of the day, because it would be contrary to the feminist movement, it would create more harms in our society, we believe that it is highly important for the feminist movement to oppose affirmative action. So for all these reasons, I beg your proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's invite the second speaker of the opposition to continue their case.
The problem is when women look at statistics and see that empirically less women hold political seats and that more women stay home, we think that's a problem because culturally it harms what women think they can do, it harms what women think that they should do, and we think we need more of that balance to come out so that women feel like it's culturally acceptable for them to go out and take these positions, that it's viable for them to do so as well. And that's why on our side of the house we are so very proud to be opposing today. So I'm going to get into some quick refutation, and then I'm going to get into our third and final substantive material about how this empowers equality commitments. But let's get into this first argument that they brought up on their side of the house. They talked about this idea about the inconsistency of the feminist movement. First of all, we're not disagreeing that women have, the same capacity. What we're saying on our side of the house is that women have the capacity, yet they're not willing to try and go out to achieve it. And what we're saying is when you have affirmative action, it encourages those women to go out and achieve those things, but not only that, it shows them that it's culturally acceptable for them to do so. But additionally, we told you about why the social construct restricts them from being able to do so and why there's some inherent bias. But even if on our side of the house there were an inconsistency, what we would say is that political movements shift stances all the time according to how society changes. And we think we're shifting our stance according to how society changes. We think the feminist problem has moved away from legal issues towards things more like women actually being willing to actually achieve these things and women being restricted in terms of culturally what they believe in. So we think like shifting stances according to how we've seen society shift as well is totally okay. They never even talk to us about why it's harmful for this inconsistency in the first place. They also talked about anti-discrimination. What we would say on our side of the house is that when you're talking about this consistency, women were mainly talking about negative discrimination in this kind of way. We think we're talking about negative discrimination for these women. And additionally, what we saw was that my first speaker made this, volatile attack about who is this house. We think they haven't addressed that yet. We think this house is actually a really important actor because if it's the feminist movement, we think, we have to do things more in the interest of the feminist movement. And if we're looking at, the governments as a whole, then we think that's a different scenario. So let's also go into the second argument that they brought up, this idea of the nature of Western liberal democracies. First of all, here they talked about how we've seen a steady increase of women, taking these seats, of women having these kinds of benefits. What we would say is we've seen more women be able to take these seats. We've seen legal improvements to allow for women to do this. But we don't think this is fundamentally enough. We've told you why the social paradigm of women, having these kinds of things negatively affects what women think of themselves and what women think they can achieve, and we think this is fundamentally harmful. We think that is something that requires actual impetus for change to actually increase the amount of people who go through these things. We think, as we've told you, if we have this kind of affirmative action, what it results in is feminists, women being much more willing to apply for these jobs because they feel like they have a higher likelihood of getting there, and women being more willing to actually pursue these kinds of things. And additionally, we think it's empirically false that women have achieved state of equality. We think a lot of the times we do see these state of equality and things like that. And they said here, even if there were discrimination, there were mechanisms to deal with that. First of all, it's not only the discriminators that we have a problem with, we think it's the woman's mindset that also needs to be encouraged. We think it's the women who also need to believe in themselves and believe they can actually have this change and believe it's okay for them to go through this change. We think that's something that isn't dealt with in the status quo due to these mechanisms. Additionally, what we see is often women don't always sue, but additionally it's often really hard to do these things. But additionally, we think it's not only about jobs, we think it's about other areas too, for example, holding political seats. That's not applicable there. So we think the mechanisms simply aren't enough. Sure.
So are you actually telling me on this issue of willingness that women in Canada and the United States are not willing to go for higher purposes, are not willing and don't think they're capable of going up?
Exactly. We think a lot of women think that what they should be doing and what their role is just to be a stay-at-home mom because that's their perception of society. That's what they think women should be doing, and that's what they think fundamentally that their role is as a mother and when they grow up. So let's get right into this idea and thank you about discrimination. So they said that they're going to discriminate men. We think that no, we think we're actually equalizing the field. We think we're actually balancing this out. We think that's not necessarily true. So on our side, we talked to you firstly about how the inequality is there, and they said, we want to achieve this by ourselves. I refuted this earlier within, the first point, and also they said that, being a housewife is good. It's good to, have the choice there. Well, you'd say, sure, it's good to have the choice. But ladies and gentlemen, when we think women think that should be the choice they undertake, and when women feel like, that's what they should be doing as a woman, we think that's a fundamental problem. We think that cultural notion needs to be going down, and we've told you why if more women take these seats, and if more women are incentivized to do this, that's a benefit. So we also talked about perception. They said that, we're not backing down. First of all, we would say is that we are somewhat backing down. They're saying that this need is already fulfilled. They're saying that, it's already okay. So we think that that's not necessarily true. But additionally, what we would say is that when they see a woman not supporting affirmative action anymore, they're saying, oh, they're taking down ground. Women are no longer thinking that they actually need this. So thirdly, let's get into this argument about how this empowers equality movements. Let's talk to you about these actual feminist movements themselves. We think when we have these kinds of things like quotas, we think we have these things like encouragement, when we think we have these things like more likely to get the actual job, we see more women come up with positions of power, positions of actual success, and we think the likelihood of that is actually much more. And we think that they will attribute some of these actual things they achieved to affirmative action. They'll say, oh, I was able to achieve my dreams through affirmative action, and we think as a result, they'll be supporting affirmative action. They'll say, oh, it's something that was really beneficial to me, and we think that they'll eventually look at the Feminist Party and say, there's something that actually really benefited me, something that's actually worked, something that's actually efficient. But additionally, when you have women in places of power, we say is that more likely to actually lobby for women itself. Because they have the perspective of the woman, they understand what problems deal with women, and we think it results in more representation for that. So we think they're going to be lobbying for women much more. And we think when you look at the Feminist Party, we think the Feminist Party needs as much support as possible. Because a lot of people think the Feminist Party is irrelevant, a lot of people think the Feminist Party is something that's extremist, and we think a lot of the time you need the support from well-recognized actors for it to actually run efficient. If you look at Sarah Palin, she actually started going out and doing things like going to press conferences, being like a speaker, a keynote speaker for certain feminist movement conferences. And we think when we have more of these circumstances where they hold power, we think that's really beneficial. But secondly, what we would actually say is that we actually discourage the practicality of these feminist movements. Because when we say, it's getting much better, when we say we don't need as much help anymore, when we say, this isn't as topical of an issue anymore, we think the urgency of the situation and the way society perceives the necessity of this party goes down. We think what that results in is things like less funding from, rich women. We think this results in less people joining these feminist parties. We think this results in less support for these feminist parties. And we think this results in them not being able to lobby their own causes. But additionally, what we would say is when other countries see us strive for the very best, see us strive for the most we can achieve, we think that also inspires them to be taking this course of action and seeing that it's unacceptable for what they're doing in the lower scale. But additionally, what we would say is if you look at other movements, we think they will naturally demand more rights as well, the more women also demand rights. So we think when women demand more rights, these other people will say, what about us? You're being unequal to us. And we think also they will have much more legitimacy as a group because of that. And ladies and gentlemen, on our side of the house, since we believe that affirmative action is the way to break this cultural paradigm that a woman cannot achieve what she can actually achieve, we think that we are very proud to oppose it.
Thank you very much. Let's invite the third speaker of the proposition to deliver their reply speech.
In my speech, I'm going to tackle three main issues. The first one is this cultural context and mindset that team proposition has been talking to us in this debate. The second one relates to self-regulation and natural evolution in Western liberal democracies. And my third point is about negatively impacting perception of both men and women if we don't apply this motion. So let's see the cultural context that opposition has tried to explain throughout this debate. They say that the cultural context of Western liberal democracies doesn't allow women to do so. Well, that's genuinely false. We see how the concept of self-empowered women, of independent women, and so on is being actively promoted in these societies. We're not talking about Russia or Eastern European countries in which such stereotypes still exist, that women need to stay at home and support their husbands and not have careers of their own. Western liberal democracies are so much different from other countries in the world because they have surpassed this kind of stereotype, because they have surpassed, no thank you, inequality, gender inequality. And even if we take the worst case scenario in which some women don't think they're capable of holding such positions, and so on, they don't think they're empowered enough to hold such positions, no thank you, we see how affirmative actions towards them, positive discrimination is not helpful. Why? Because if you're a woman and you don't believe in your chances of obtaining a certain position, of following a certain career, of becoming a politician, or a doctor, or a judge, and so on, when you hear that the only way you can do that is if society agrees upon giving that position to you without you being really worthy of it, you're not going to be encouraged and empowered. You're actually going to think that this social paradigm, this social stereotype, according to which women are not as qualified as men, are not as powerful as men, is correct. You're going to think that the only way you can become a judge in the United States is if positive discrimination exists, and they allow you to have this kind of quotas allocated for you in order to get that position. We believe this is highly impacts women negatively, and it doesn't change this cultural context that team opposition has been talking about. My second point related to negatively impacting perception. Well, our third argument referred to how this is discriminatory for men, and we see how this backlash actually manifests itself in the area of perception. In Belgium, gender quotas have been introduced. In Belgium, in a large corporation, gender quotas have been introduced. In politics, that has happened as well. Certain statistics and studies have been done afterwards, and they've shown that 80% of men thought it was unfair and thought it was discriminatory towards them. Also, most men believe that those women that got the positions because of gender quotas did not deserve the functions that they were occupying. After gender quotas were imposed in Belgium, which is a democratic country, a model in today's status quo, men were highly discouraged. They thought that was intrinsically unfair and didn't have a better perception of women. And that's exactly the goal of feminism, both making women as equal as men and making women as empowered as men, and both changing the perception of society towards thinking that women are as equal as men and that women can occupy the same position as men without needing external help and this kind of stimulus that comes from the outside. So we see how this whole point that less women are called political seats and the harms that because women don't think they can do this doesn't stand on side opposition. Also, they thought about this idea that they brought up this idea that 79% of judges in the United States are men, and that women are less successful in this kind of areas. Well, we see that Western liberal democracies are so different from other countries in the world in the idea that they are self-regulating in this kind of instances. We see how every year more and more women become CEOs of large companies. More and more women hold seats as judges. More and more women hold seats in Congress and so on. We see that we don't need this kind of impact, with this kind of stimulus, this kind of external factor regulating that, simply because this is a natural evolution, and this comes along with the premises of a consolidated democracy. In the moment in which you offer equal opportunities, equal chances, and equal treatment, these kind of results will come by themselves. And not enough time has passed since women have been given equal rights to men in order for all areas of our economy to stabilize themselves, and all areas of our society to become as equal when it comes to women and men representation. I'm not going to take a bit more of this. Thank you. The next point I'm going to talk about is the way women are negatively impacted by this, by implementing this motion, and not only the ideology of the feminist movement. Well, I've already, as I've already told you, thank you. Now, as I've already told you, the opposition has asserted that women don't have the willingness to become judges. Women don't have the willingness to occupy the kind of positions we would offer them quotas to do so. Well, this kind of premise solely denies the existence of the feminist movement. No, thank you. The feminist movement is backed up by women that want to be self-empowered. It's backed up by women that are highly willing to occupy such positions. The reason that we're having this debate today is that the feminist movement is so powerful that it can already deny receiving such positive discrimination. It is so powerful that it doesn't need external help anymore. It is so backed up by women, and both women and men worldwide, that inequality needs and has to be achieved in all areas, that it doesn't need any kind of pity, any kind of mercy from any group in our society or from the government itself. So what we see that in this debate, especially in the context of Western liberal democracy, what we've shown you is that implementing positive discrimination in any kind of area would be highly harmful. It would actually give more power to the gender stereotypes according to which women are not entitled to those positions and are not able to get there. It would do so by discouraging women to pursue such careers and by altering the perception of men. men respect a woman that is holding the same position as they do if that woman has done so through her own power, by her own means. But they don't, as studies have proven, they don't still have that kind of perception when that woman is being offered the position. The third point we've proved in this debate and hasn't really been tackled by team opposition is the one related to male discrimination, and that that is both contrary to the ideology of the feminist movement, which is an anti-discrimination movement itself, and it is both harmful to all people in our society, not only men or women. So because of all these reasons, we beg of you to implement this motion and vote for the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's please welcome the third speaker of the opposition to deliver a speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a man, and we've talked a lot about this actor of the man in today's debate, and I think I might be taking a good step and a good measure for feminism by saying that sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes men are wrong. They stand in a position of bias, and they keep on talking about how men aren't going to respect women. Well, if they don't, that's because they're wrong. And I'm going to be looking at today's debate by asking you two questions. First of all, is there still a necessity for affirmative action? Second of all, how will this resolution achieve change? So first of all, is there still a necessity for affirmative action? Our simple answer, yes. We told you that the traditional views of society are still present, in my first biggest point. We still told you and gave you statistics, ladies and gentlemen, that women are still less successful. They still hire less women in politics. There are less women who achieve high positions within society. They're still factually, on average, paid less, ladies and gentlemen. And we gave you analysis on how this is creating a perpetuating cycle and how, that results in due to employer bias and just due to the fact of how newer generations are brought up, ladies and gentlemen. We told you we need someone to break that cycle. And we told you it's not the feminist movements simply because they have a lack of political influence and a lack of influence as a whole. Now, what did they try to say to this? Well, first of all, they tried to say, in their first speaker, they said, well, Western liberal democracies no longer really have discriminations. We've already made huge developments in the last 4 decades. We think that's completely untrue, ladies and gentlemen. We gave you empirical evidence. They didn't give any of their evidence of their own. We think it's funny because we think there's still a lot more to achieve. We gave you facts. That doesn't stand. They also said, this idea about women want to achieve equality themselves, but what we told you is that they simply can't, and they're neglecting our points. We told you they don't have the resources, they don't have the will, they didn't respond to that. We told you once they pass their resolution, the movements will lose funding and lose relevance, so they won't be able to do it themselves. Then they also went off on this idea about how it's okay to be a housewife if women want to, but what we tell you is it's not usually that women want to, it's not usually that they want to be housewives, it's just that, as our analysis stated, the women feel obliged because that's society's contract, ladies and gentlemen. That's how women are brought up, and that's how society perceives them. They didn't engage with us on that analysis. Sure. And then they said, that men do act, and it's not, men don't think that women like being treated badly. And ladies and gentlemen, we don't think it's that the men think it's okay for women to treat badly. It's just that men sometimes are biased. They sometimes don't realize when women are treating badly because they're from a biased position. They don't always notice when women are being treated badly, and they don't always notice these inequalities because they're, a bit less significant in today's society. And then that's why we don't like, and don't agree with the quotas you guys have been throwing at our side of the house when men have been saying, oh, they're not necessary anymore. We think men are just from a biased position. I outlined this at the start. They also said it's false that women see themselves, it's false, and they said, women are independent today. We have people like Hillary Clinton, all those people in office. We already have some people in office, ladies and gentlemen. Well, first of all, Hillary Clinton has done a lot, but she was beaten by Barack Obama. We still see that men still have more people in political office, and we tell you on our side of the house, by continuing this affirmative action, we achieve more and more women in political office, achieving the benefits they talked about and how it inspires other women. And we think that brings me perfectly into my second theme and my second question of how will this resolution achieve change or parallel.
We actually proved to you today that the solution is not forcefully introducing women in those positions, but letting them achieve them and men changing their perception that way.
Okay, I already gave you some analysis on how they just can achieve them right now, which you haven't, responded to. And I'm going to continue along my speech and give you more analysis as I get to my second question, ladies and gentlemen. So how will this resolution achieve change? We told you there's going to be a complacency that's created. We told you men and women are going to forget this necessity and think everything's just fine. We told you the feminist movements will become less relevant, they'll lose funding because people aren't going to think there's as much of an urgency since governments are backing down. We told you also some incredible good analysis from my second speaker, which they didn't take the time to rebut, and how globally Western nations can have influence and actually should continue to set an example for developing nations who do have very, very, very big problems in gender equality still today. We still think what our developed nations still do, but they don't. And, we also told you how it helps other movements such as LGBT rights, because when governments give rights to one group that's discriminated against, the other groups have, more of a capability to say, hey, we want rights too, and they didn't respond to this. And now their only first response was, we're not backing down. Yes, we kind of are, ladies and gentlemen. I gave you analysis on how feminist movements become irrelevant and lose influence. They didn't respond to it. And then they also said, with this weird first point, they kind of said, we need to show women that women have the capacity and women need to prove themselves and show they can do things in normal conditions. First of all, there's an assertion here, because these aren't normal conditions. If we stop this resolution, it's not going to be normal conditions, as I proved to you with my necessity question and how the construct of society still doesn't give us normal conditions. There's still going to be employer bias, so that's an assertion. That point falls, ladies and gentlemen. And then they said, well, we have a perfected system, because women can go and sue. I'm going to rebut this on a bunch of levels. First of all, it's also the women's mindset that is taking a factor into this, as my partner showed. And, having to hire a lawyer, go to a courtroom just to be accepted isn't exactly a perfect system. And it's also not perfect because it's not actually that easy. They think it's so perfect because it's easy to the court will agree with you. But I don't think it's that easy to prove discrimination with evidence in court, because it's something that happens psychologically, ladies and gentlemen. That's pretty logical. I also tell you that even if they're right, I tell you that a declaration from a judicial court doesn't make women equal in society. That's not a perfect mechanism, and the perfect mechanism they're talking about doesn't even apply in all areas. They're only talking about when women are denied jobs. We've also talked to you about how women don't have enough power in political office. They haven't dealt with that and focused their case too much on, getting jobs, we think. They also talked about this idea that was left unrebutted about discrimination to men. Seriously? Why is discrimination to men bad? We told you there's an imbalance of power, and that power needs to be rebalanced. We told you for years and years, men were discriminating against women, and putting women down, and that's why the inequality was taken. If we have to compensate for that by discriminating against men to bring women back up, that's not a fundamentally bad thing. I'm a man, I'll take it. I think most men will. We think that point falls. So today, ladies and gentlemen, it's because we better understood that we're not done, the time for change is not over. It's because we better understood society's construct, we better understood how men are in a biased position, that we stand here begging to oppose this motion.
Thank you very much. Let's invite Luciano back to the floor to offer the reply speech of the opposition.
So I'm going to summarize this debate in two key themes. Firstly, necessity. Secondly, benefits. So go into the necessity. So we saw a side proposition come up and tell us, well, we don't think there's a necessity because we already see an increase in the amount of women taking in these kinds of power. What we would say is that we told you that culturally this was, the paradigm for women to, be these housewives. Culturally, it was the paradigm for women not to be taking these seats of power. We think this cultural cycle is still somewhat actually occurring, and we think the perception and the environment which women live in is for them to be actually doing these kinds of things. We think cultural change is incredibly slow because it takes time to accustom to new cultures, and we've seen that take super long to change. Right? We've seen decades since we've allowed for legal equality for women, and still we see very little change within this atmosphere. We see it very rare for women politicians to have huge seats of power. We see it very rare for women judges to exist. We think this is incredibly, not actually working that fast. But even if we would see this progress working, steadily, what we would say is that on our side of the house, we speed it up even more because we make it much more easier for this empowerment to happen. We make it much more easier for them to see these examples of cultural change actually happening in real time. And also on their side of the house, they said, we deal with these case scenarios of discrimination due to mechanisms. On our side of the house, the main point was that women are the ones who are the actors we need to target now, instead of men specifically. So we think that mechanism doesn't deal with that. But also we think that this mechanism has been inefficient at some times, but additionally we're not only talking about jobs, we're talking about other things, and they never reconstructed the reputation we gave to that. So we think we've proven to you there is a necessity for this actually to work. So we think let's go right into the bigger and meatier theme about benefits. What we'd say is that they really stress this idea about why women will look really weak. We think, first of all, in the current status quo, when men see, a lot of, men politicians and a lot less women politicians, we think already that bias somewhat already exists in the status quo. When they see these women holding very little seats of political office, they will say, oh, they don't strive to do that, that's not who they are, that they're unable to achieve those kinds of things. We think that that's where women also look incredibly weak. And then they also talked about, inconsistency. And first of all, we really refuted this by saying that, first of all, why is this bad for political movements to have some level of inconsistency? We think that they shift stances all the time, but additionally, we don't think it's actually changing the stance. We think it's just recognizing that there is a certain cultural disability for women and actually trying to mend that. Additionally, we talked about, how we're backing down, and we think that discourages support for the actual feminist movement, and this discourages further improvement. And they said, we're not backing down. If you listen to Proposition's analysis, they specifically said that, it's okay, that already, it's fine, that we already see a lot of equality for these women. So we think that is the kind of rhetoric that we're seeing is actually backing down. Additionally, on our side of the house, we talked, really mainly about this idea of culture. And they said that, in the status quo, women see that other women are able to achieve these things. We think what they see is these kinds of examples where women get into really large powers of, hold really large power is really rare, right? They see that it's really isolated case scenarios, and we think that since it's such a small minority of cases where they're actually really successful, we think this actively discourages women from breaking this. We think we need to kickstart this by making it so there are more women to actually hold these positions, so that effect could happen on a much larger scale, where a lot more women, they see a lot more women actually holding this kind of power. And they said that, we're discriminating men. First of all, even if, we don't think we're actually discriminating against them in the way that we're actually, really meaningfully harming them, because we think that we're equalizing it. But additionally, what we would say is even if it was a discrimination, we think it's quite short term. We think eventually, in the long term, we would see much more benefits for women as a whole. So ladies and gentlemen, because we think there's a necessity and many benefits, we are so very proud to oppose on side opposition.
Thank you very much. Let's invite Irina back to the floor to offer the last speech of the debate.
Let's imagine that for this edition of Heart of Europe, it was one seat left. Only one debater could get it. And let's assume that me, a woman, and Tudor, a man, were both competing for this place. And let's also assume that we are equally as smart, even though we all know that that's not. So let's assume that based on affirmative action, I am given the position. Now, this would have a huge negative impact on both me and Tudor. Why? I, as a woman, would feel weak, would feel the need, would feel that the organizer of Heart of Europe feels pity towards me. Feel like I'm not strong enough, I'm not smart enough to debate if I deserve to. That I need to be helped in order to achieve this goal. Another negative impact will be on the men that are discriminated because of the affirmative action. One, because they will continue to discriminate women. Because, like my colleague Sonia has explained, they will have the perception that women have got there because they do not deserve it. Because somebody else decided to put them there just because they are women. Furthermore, they will feel discriminated themselves. In our third argument, we have explained how males feel discriminated just because we feel the need to help a certain social group. Even though their first speaker would take that discrimination, maybe my speaker wouldn't take that discrimination. We think that the majority of men do not like to be discriminated. We believe that the majority of men feel like it's unfair that the feminist movement and women in general should have this favored position of getting jobs just because they are of a certain gender. Furthermore, we believe that from the feminist point of view, it would be contradictory to their philosophy. And they have said, well, it's not really a bad thing not to be consistent. Of course it's a bad thing not to be consistent. All throughout our speeches, we have explained how the feminist movement will lose credibility if they suddenly accept that they are not strong enough to achieve these advantages by themselves. They would indirectly accept that they need help in order to have certain jobs. This debate has also been about the power of emancipation. And we have explained how in the current context, Europe is led by a woman. Europe is led by Angela Merkel. We believe that throughout history, we as a society have made huge progress in accepting women and offering women equal chances. But even though we would accept that there is still some discrimination left, even though we would accept that there are societies that are against women and discriminate women, we believe that one, feminist movement, which is the ones that are affected by this motion, which says that the feminist movement should oppose it, still believe that they can achieve emancipation by themselves. And second of all, we believe that using affirmative action to solve this problem is a superficial way of tackling the problem. It's a superficial way of tackling a problem that has roots someplace else. We do not believe that affirmative action will change the perception that men have about women and that women themselves have about them. We believe that that would be contrary to what the women want to achieve in this society. So at the end of the day, we believe that actually feminist movement opposing self-discrimination would send a message that yes, they stand by their principles, they do believe that consistency is essential to their ideology, and they do believe that women, especially in the context of Western liberal democracies, which are more developed than the rest of the world, women do have the capability of achieving such purpose. So because of all of these reasons, I'm very proud to propose. Thank you.